I think a lot of it is knowing what good is and knowing what done is, right? And I think those have always been some of the things that have made creativity or art what they are, right? And like I remember talking to my art school teachers about that, like about what separates a good artist from a great artist, and they were like, knowing when you're done, like not overworking or underworking something. Um, but like the machine can't tell you what you should be doing or like what like somebody's gonna care about or what a good idea is, right? Like those sort of initial sparks have to come from you. And maybe in some like highly commercial settings it can tell you like, oh, in these parameters, like this ad can optimize this way. Like, I think there's some ways it can guide you, but we know the things that really break through are things that are like very unexpected.
Welcome to the DXC stage as we continue to unearth the insights around the future of AI, design, and business. Today, I'm so delighted to welcome Eric Snowden, SVP of Design and Head of Adobe Design. Welcome, Eric.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Awesome. How are you doing today?
Doing pretty well.
Well, we wanted to hear from you as someone who has been pioneering in the AI space, and also, Adobe plays such a central role in the design industry. Can you highlight, for us, what are some of the key kind of roles you've held, in the lifespan of Adobe, and how does that intersect with the development of AI?
Yeah, I've been at Adobe since 2012. I was part of the Behance acquisition, so came in a little bit through the side door, and I started building mobile applications, and then from there grew to running the creative team and then running the documents team, and now I run the entire design team at Adobe, going all the way from the products we build from individuals all the way up to, products we're shipping to giant enterprise companies. So it's a really wide gamut of users, of types of products, and we're really weaving AI into every single thing we do. So it's in every conversation, it's in every product. I feel like I'm living and breathing it for better and for worse. And it's interesting because I'm talking about it on the product side every day, but then I'm thinking about it from what does that mean for my team, for my people, for our processes, and then I think the third leg is what does it mean for the industry? Because I feel like being at Adobe, I do have responsibilities to think about how it impacts designers and the creative industry at large. So there's a couple of different ways that I'm trying to concurrently think about AI. So it's occupying my entire waking life at this moment, I feel like.
Yeah, yeah. And how would you say, since, Gen AI kind of products came out, like how often are you using it every day and how you're using it?
Um, it, it constantly. And I think for a lot of people, when they think of Gen AI, they think about like whole cloth creation. And I'm sure for a lot of people that is super interesting. When I think of myself, I'm a photographer. I used to, teach photography at Parsons. I was a photo assistant to a couple of well-known photographers. If I said their names, you would know who they were. And I literally don't leave the house without a camera. That was a recent New Year's resolution of mine. And so I'm taking photos literally every single day. And I can't think of the last time I didn't use generative fill on a photo. That was, something we launched near the beginning days of Firefly that is just a game changer. I don't make a photo that I don't use that on. Also, not to turn this into an Adobe commercial, but we launched adaptive presets, which are smart presets that use AI to look at your photos and do like better auto corrections on them. And so when I think of AI, I'm not always thinking about text to image. I'm thinking about like smarter tools, which I think is, at least for me personally, is infinitely more interesting as a professional, is the things I was already doing just getting smarter. And when I think about those things, the answer is constantly, like multiple times a day. And then when I think about my work as a designer, and I'm a design leader, but I still like making things. I've been really digging into the design to code world. I think that's super fascinating. I wrote a Medium article a couple weeks ago about Replit. I built 3 apps in 3 days, and just sort of my mind was blown by the fact that, I'm a pretty reasonable programmer. I think a lot of designers around the same age range I'm in had to be coders as well as designers. That was just, they were the same job for a long time. So I can build things, but the fact that I was able to build 3 apps in 3 days and was able to build things that there's no way I'm talented enough to code very quickly just really changed my perception on what some of these roles are going to look like in the future. So um, digging in every day in multiple different facets.
Mm. How would you characterize the kind of current zeitgeist around AI? Where you obviously see a lot of the enthusiasm, the excitement, the accessibility of AI. So how would you kind of characterize the current moment of how business feels in the world of AI?
I mean, there's no one way to describe it. I mean, I was in Japan talking to customers a few weeks ago. Their perception is completely different to customers in the United States. Even in the United States, if I talk to a photographer or an illustrator or a designer in a Fortune 500 company, they have completely different opinions. Like there's no consensus. And I also think we're doing a lot of longitudinal studies at Adobe about AI, and talk to the same people 6 months apart, you get different answers. It's very fluid. Um, and so the answer is it depends. um, but I think a lot of people are starting to see um, what I was talking about for my personal use at the beginning, that AI is, I think, being used by companies in more thoughtful ways. I think when a lot of these new paradigms first emerged, a lot of companies were just sandwiching them into existing products in fairly like unthoughtful ways. And we tried really hard not to do that, and to really think through what are existing or unmet user needs that we could solve with these. And we took a little bit of time to do that. We didn't rush to be first on a lot of these things. And I think that was the right move. And we also made sure that we were being thoughtful about what it meant for our existing, customer base for us to do these things. And I'm really proud of the approach that we've taken. And I'm also proud of the things like content authenticity we've done to counterbalance the potentially problematic parts of AI. And no solution is perfect, but I think we've found like good foils to some of this. Um, and so, yeah, I think it's a lot of like different things and a lot of different feelings, and in different cultures I think feel differently. I was really surprised when I was in Japan talking to artists, even illustrators, who I think tend to be the most sensitive to AI. I was in a group of like very high-end illustrators in Japan. They were all like, "Oh, we're totally fine. We don't see it as a threat." And that, if I talked to the same group of the same caliber illustrators in the United States, I think they would have been like, had the complete opposite reaction. So it's very different everywhere.
And what would you say is, your vision for how AI should be considered and implemented versus what you might be seeing in reality today? Like, what are some of those gaps?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times, again, when I'm talking about AI, I'm sort of specifically talking right now, at least, about creative AI, and I can talk about the rest of it because we also make document tools and marketing tools. But on the creative side, the thing I've been really pushing hard is I want to make sure creatives have choice. And that comes in a few different ways. I think one is, in our tools, there's very few things that you can't do another way, right? And we're not taking away anything. All of our AI tools are additive. And so if you don't like generative fill because you just don't want to use AI, we have other ways to remove objects from a scene. We have other ways to edit a photo. You can choose not to go down that path. It's probably to your own detriment, but like you can make that choice. It's a user choice. And as a creative user, you can choose to not have your content in Adobe's AI. And we are one of the only companies that by default, your creative work is not in our AI. We were the first company to do that. Some have followed suit since then, very few. But my, sort of thing was, I believe that creatives should be able to choose whether they participate in AI, both from I'm using a tool perspective, but I've created a body of work. Do I want it to be in the model or not? And I don't think that should be opt out. And that was really important for me as a creative person at the creative company to be vocal about that on behalf of creatives and on behalf of our users. And so, like, I think that was a really good example of like design having a seat at the table at a creative company, being able to influence and hopefully bend the curve on the industry a little bit. And we have seen other companies following our lead and changing their policies because of that. And like, those are things that I'm, incredibly proud of that we've been able to do.
Mm. I'm almost hearing this theme of, giving and empowering creatives with the choice, the agency to make those decisions rather than kind of AI being imposed on them. Is that kind of a
100%.
yeah.
Yeah. And then I think the other thing is, you know, this current generation we're in of AI is good at making something generically beautiful, but it's actually not that good at making something specific, right? As creatives, we're often not trying to make a, generic picture of a car. We're trying to make a very specific model of a car in a very specific position in a very specific location with a specific lighting and all these things. Like, it's not, we're not just hitting an I'm feeling lucky button, which is how a lot of AI works today. We have something in our minds or something our client is asking us for that is very clearly defined that we need to create. And so as Adobe, as a company that makes, software for creative control, that is another thing that we care about and are talking about a lot. And, something we launched a couple weeks ago is the ability to use like rough 3D models to like pose out a scene and then render that as like structural reference for the AI. And that's just like one example of something to give users control in a way that's like really hard to describe with words, right? And like, I've always thought about AI as like, as a creative person, I have a picture in my head. I take that picture, I turn that into words. The computer turns that back into a picture. And it's like, well, why does it ever have to go into words? Why can't it just stay a picture the whole time? Like, why do I need that translation layer between essentially two different languages? Why can't it stay in that like language of images the entire time? And I think that's something we're thinking about a lot. And so I think creative, like control, when you say control, I think the first part of it is definitely about like content, but I think the second is about like actually having your hand on the wheel when it comes to like driving the model and what it does and what it makes for you or with you.
I think what's interesting here is, as we're talking about what you just said, is you're kind of illuminating some practices or principles for good AI within a product experience. I'm kind of curious from this kind of visioning standpoint, do you see within an organizational setting, how AI is changing the way we work, the way we collaborate? What does that kind of dynamic look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I think in marketing organizations, I think it's in content creation organizations, I think we're seeing it hit first. I think there are areas where, things like graphics creation and translation, other things are being like sort of rapidly sped up. Like some of our content teams that make, graphics for our products or templates or things like that, I'm hearing are having like 40% capacity gains because of this. And, I think the good companies are saying, great, we can create twice as much content because that's what we needed to do anyway. Right. And I think the wrong kinds of companies are saying, well, we need 40% fewer people. Right. And so at Adobe, we're saying, oh my gosh, great. We like always needed more content. We haven't been able to hire enough people or fast enough to do this. Like, this is just going to allow us to have a bigger library of content for our users. Like, let's just keep putting, fuel on this and making more stuff. And so I think we're seeing like huge productivity gains when it comes to that. And that's been really wonderful. I think same on our content strategy side, we're seeing like, how do we take our like really brilliant content strategy team and allow them to build tools using AI to empower more people um, to create under some amount of governance, and then allow them to be editors and curators of the content that's made, so they can sort of create the machine and then like edit the machine in a lot of ways. I think the place where we're seeing the most like innovation happening like right now that we're sort of in the middle of figuring out is an actual like UX design. But in UX design, a lot of tools have been popping up and changing just in the last few weeks, right? Again, I think the the code creation tools are very interesting, but at a company like ours, there's some challenges there, right? They have to use the design system, they have to fit coding standards. Like, there are things that they have to do that not all of these are ready for yet. But some of them, like Cursor and others, are getting really close, and we're doing some pretty interesting experiments there alongside our engineering teams. Um, but I think there's this idea of designers being able to build out like functioning prototypes that hook into APIs that we're like either at for certain design technologists, people who are like code savvy, or like moments away from a broader group of people, which I think gets really interesting. And, going back to the designing AI tools for a second, like part of the design process for designing AI tools that is very different is you actually have to build it before you design it. So, we were building Firefly. We actually couldn't design it until we got a build of it, because we actually didn't know what it did and what it was good at. Until you know what it's good at, you don't know how to design around the things it's not good at. Right. And so, I was telling the engineering team, I'm like, give us the quickest, worst build you can before we give you any designs. We will use it, understand it, and then we will design it. And for some designers, that was like really uncomfortable, because they were like, oh my gosh, the engineering team is like building something before we design anything. Like, what's going to happen? And I was like, I had this very clear agreement with the engineering leaders, like, you're going to build something fast, and that is not what we're going to ship. You're going to throw all of it away. So do it quickly, but we can't actually design it until we have hands-on with it. And I think that was like a very important, like, early learning with these AI tools. Like, you cannot design them until you use them, because you will be so wrong, because they will do things that you will not expect, or some things will be so much better than you thought they would be. Some things will be so much worse than you thought they would be. There'll be surprises, and you just will not know how to design around those things until you're literally using, and you're like, oh, like that's what that does. Or why can't it do that? How am I going to explain that to a user? Or, oh, like if they do this thing in this order, this unexpected thing happens. How do I make sure that they don't do that, or they do it like this? And you just cannot possibly know those things until you're hands-on with the
Mm.
product.
How would you articulate this change from because there's the traditional product development, life cycle and process. Like, how is this starting to re-architect what that looks like in the world of AI experiences?
I mean, I think it's maybe because I'm a tennis player, it feels a lot more like you're just hitting a ball back and forth. It just, when we were first developing Firefly, we were literally handing off designs and getting back builds on a 24-hour basis. And it was just like every day something was happening, and it was changing very fluidly. And, you know, for some designers at Adobe who had worked on desktop products where the cycles, spoilers, aren't 24 hours, this was like so liberating for them. And, for certain kinds of designers, like working that way, it was very like anxiety inducing. It's like, but I don't know what's going to happen. I can't plan. I can't do this. I can't do that. And for some designers, they're like, this is the most fun I've ever had. Like, I'm figuring it out. We're going back and forth. It really feels like a team sport, and I'm excited about the unknown. And And on top of that, it's not just you're figuring out what the model can do. What it can do is, if you're making your own model, and I think we're in a relatively unique position there, what it was able to do was also changing every day, right? So it would be really bad at something. The next day, we get a call from the engineers. They'd be like, "Oh, by the way, like that thing it was terrible at, now that's the thing it's the best at, and it can do these three other things it couldn't do, but that thing it was really good at, it like completely can't do anymore." So be like, okay, and then we'd have to like rethink everything. And so it was like designing on quicksand a little bit. And so it was this real back and forth that was like really fascinating and a fun environment, again, for the right kinds of people. And when I was building out this team, I had to sit down with every designer and be like, this is the environment you're going to be in. Does this sound interesting to you? If it doesn't, that is fine. This won't be right for everyone. And this is not like this is a judgment free zone. Like I'm trying to like explain to you the situation you're going to be in. And there were some great designers on my team that are like, no way. I do not, that sounds horrible. And I was like, great. Like they're still the best designers on my team. Like I have no judgment. There were some designers that are like, hell yes, that sounds super fascinating. I was like, great. And I was like handpicking people to be on this project because I knew that's how important it was. But I also knew like I needed a very specific kind of person for this environment. And I think that's still fairly true. I mean, working on version 4 of the model. I think I can say that like there's version 3 is out. Like, yeah, there's going to be a next version. And that's still how it works. There are surprises all the time. Like all of a sudden it gets great at something literally overnight. Like something it was terrible at the next day, it's like incredible at. And that's super fun and dynamic, but it's also really hard when you're trying to create like a durable system underneath.
Yeah, let's go one layer deeper on this. So you describe this environment of kind of designing in a world of quicksand. It's adaptive, it's fluid, it's moving. What does this, if that's maybe a representation of the future of a design practice or even the evolution of a designer mindset, like how do you kind of articulate 3 years out from now, 3 to 7 years out? Like what does that world look like if we just stop and imagine?
Yeah. I think at the macro level, I think all of these jobs really start to get blurry. Um, Again, if when I start looking at a lot of these AI coding tools, like if I can go and build 3 apps in 3 days today, what can I do 5 years from now? And to be fair, like, I was using Replit, and I don't have an affiliate code. I'm not trying to like pump them up. Like you could replace Replit with anyone else, but I did have to know code when I got stuck. But I really felt like I was talking to an engineer, and the way I was chatting with it, like I felt like I was like slacking an engineer on my team. Like, why don't you try this or look at this? And um, I ended up getting to a point where I actually wrote thank you a couple of times because you just get into this weird mindset where you're conversing with this thing. And I think we're just going to go further down that path. And I think like as data tools get more conversational, people who aren't trained in data, which a lot of designers aren't, that's going to become more ubiquitous. As coding tools become conversational, that's going to become more ubiquitous. Design tools, same thing. Everybody's going to have access to these skills that have been that have historically required a lot of education or training or time to learn. So when everyone has access to all of the same things, like these jobs, I think get real blurry between them. I think taste is still going to play a massive role in all of this. I think people really, really underestimate that, because if I give the same AI creative tools to a creative person and to someone who is not creative, and I showed you the outputs as a group of designers, you could tell who's who 100% of the time. The machine is not obfuscating that from you. Right. And so like it's very clear to me from the beginning, because I had a lot of anxiety around that at the beginning in the early days of Firefly. It's like, oh my God, is this like normalizing creativity? And then I saw what some of the people not on my team, and there's lots of creative people at Adobe that aren't in the design team. Like we have like, but you could tell.
Yeah, I find that really interesting is normalizing creativity. Can we like break that up a little bit? I think that's such an interesting thought because everyone has access to everything now, but if all is equal, what remains, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it is it's knowing what good is and knowing what done is. Right. And I think those have always been some of the things that have made creativity or art what they are. Right. And like I remember talking to my art school teachers about that, like about what separates a good artist from a great artist. And they were like, knowing when you're done, like not overworking or underworking something. Um, but like the machine can't tell you what you should be doing or like what like somebody is going to care about or what a good idea is, right? Like those sort of initial sparks have to come from you. And maybe in some like highly commercial settings, it can tell you like, oh, in these parameters, like this ad can optimize this way. Like, I think there's some ways it can guide you, but we know the things that really break through are things that are like very unexpected,
Mm.
right?
Do you think, as I think about this judgment on taste or quality, you don't necessarily have to be a trained designer. Certainly, it should help. It should help you. And so I'm thinking about like, we talked about the PD model. How's that going to evolve? Like, how does this start to even further blur? What's the differentiation between product management and design? Is an example, or you can now deploy code, right? And so I think there's still needed expertise in either one of those three areas and what excellence looks like. But it almost feels like the kind of day-to-day stuff is blurrier.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think some of my best designers are not trained designers. Like I don't think that's like a necessary requirement for any of this. I think a lot of taste comes from like looking at great for a really long time and absorbing what that means. And like anybody can do that. You have to put in the reps like anything else. Um, I mean, I've always had a pretty, I don't know, I have to think about how I can be kind of bombastic when I talk about product managers. I've been a head of product, so I like know what that job is. And I guess I'll say, I think the higher up you go into being an executive, and a lot of people are going to probably smiling, nodding, like it's like an upside down triangle. Like you all converge into the same job. Like a head of engineering, a head of product, and a head of design are 98% the same thing. And it like a lot of people could switch between those jobs pretty seamlessly. And many of us, and myself included, have done that. I've run engineering teams and product teams, and it was like basically the same thing I'm doing now. And what I think is going to happen though is that is going to start going down the stack. And so design managers, engineering managers, and product managers are going to start becoming the same job. And like designers, PMs, and engineers are going to start becoming the same job, that has not been true. And I think it's going to like be like full stack. They're going to start blurring the way that it's blurred at the top. Like that is the change I think AI is going to bring.
It's interesting. So, we at the council talk to a lot of design executives, and there's that shared understanding. When you get to the executive level, you're all business executives with different special, areas of expertise. So if we flip that same logic to the rest of the organization, the middle management layer, the IC layers, are you kind of saying there's a creator class that's just emerging that blurs all the lines, or is that kind of what you're saying?
If everybody is able to design in code and have access to data, why would you hire somebody who only does one of those things? Right. And so are you hiring somebody with a programming background who does design okay and the other thing okay? Or are you hiring somebody who like really understands businesses, okay, it's not like which one of those which one of those primaries is the most important? I think the answer is similar to executives, you probably want to mix, right? Because not everyone is going to be equally good at all of those. And so, maybe there is a pool of people that are still kind of like product engineering and design that like lean towards that, each one of those. And I don't think everybody is going to be those kind of people, by the way. Like what I think is going to happen is you're going to see this bifurcation where you have specialists on one end that are like the best in the world at the thing, and then like super generalists at the other end, and nobody in the middle. Like, and I think it's interesting. Like, I sort of compare this to like technological disruptions in media, right? So, I was in the music industry when Napster and like Spotify and things happened, and Spotify is a great example. When that really came up, you saw the music industry split. And what happened is on the high end, you had $500 VIP ticket packages, and you would buy special $100 record packages that were like these beautiful special booklets, but no one bought CDs. Or you had Spotify and you got every song in the universe. I think that's going to happen with jobs to a certain extent, where you're going to have, you might hire the literal best motion designer in the world because AI is still not as good as that person. Or you're going to hire somebody who can do motion design and content and graphic design and this and this and this and this and this, because they can do all of those because AI is propping up them to be able to do all those pretty well. And so like my recommendation as a leader to a lot of people has been kind of pick one of those two lanes. I think you either have to be like a super, super specialist, or you have to be really, really good at a lot of things. If you're kind of good at a couple of things, I think those are the jobs that are like at the highest risk. We're all guessing here, but that's my current hypothesis.
Yeah, yeah. It reminds me of just like even in marketing, you never want to be in the middle because it'd be
Yeah,
a thing. Let's
I
talk
think
about,
that's just going to become more extreme with
yeah. So it's almost like there's a talent extreme unfolding because of
yeah.
this dynamic. What about the job of a design executive?
One of the things I've said to our product management team when they were first seeing AI, they were giving me slack, and they're like, "Oh, well, now that we have AI, it'll actually do what we tell it to do." Like insinuating that my design team doesn't always do what we're told. And I was like, "That's exactly why our jobs are safe, right?" Like, because I think the worst thing about AI is it actually does what you tell it to do. Like, you need other people to counterbalance that stuff, and you need people who are thinking about things in a different way or through a different lens to like look at things differently. Like the fact that it's actually doing what you tell it to do is not not always the best thing. And so the best designers in the world that I know and the best executives that I know are the ones that come back and say, actually, it's not this, it's that. And so if you have a machine that's just like doing what you want, or like these are normalization machines, right? Like they're taking all the world's information and averaging it and giving you an answer, at least today, right? That may change. But someone who comes back with something completely different. And so I think until that changes, there's still plenty of room for people with big new ideas to look at things in a new way.
It makes me think, to your point about the ability to say no, to reframe, to make a judgment call. It almost feels the leaders of the future are even deeper critical thinkers,
Yes.
because that's what AI cannot do as well for us, right? And so if that's a normalization, it's democratic access, then what's left is our judgment, our values.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think the human part of our roles is really important. I'm going through a big organizational change right now, and I'm spending a lot of time talking to individuals. And whenever we go through an org change at Adobe, afterwards, I always have the other leaders in other disciplines who go through reach out to me and say, like, your team seems less affected by this than my team does. Like, why is that? And I'm like, because I spent twice as much time as you did talking to people on my team to make sure they were okay before and after it happened. It's not rocket science. I don't have a magic wand. I just like put more time and effort into making sure that like it went well instead of like pulling the ripcord and hoping everything was going to be okay. And like a machine isn't going to do that. And like it takes like extreme unscalable human touch in order to make people feel like everything's going to be okay. And so there's a number of things like that that no technology makes better. And frankly, all technology makes worse. Like I cannot do those things over Slack. I have to FaceTime somebody or, get on a call like this and have a conversation with them. That is, or have a coffee walk with them. That's the only way to
You
do
know
it.
what's that just came to mind is I've been also looking at how agents work, right? And I even think about the video duplicates of us and all that stuff, right? And so there's this world where there's an artificial humanization, but then I hear what you say about there's a irreplaceable human touch to understanding with empathy and how to guide decisions. And it just like, spin to my mind of like, what does that future of management even look like as digital workforces start to evolve? We're hearing how people are using AI in performance reviews, in leadership development and training. So there's something that I think you're hitting on here that's really interesting about what is uniquely human
Yeah.
about the leader's job.
Yeah. And I think, and maybe hope that we see a swing back to that, right? I think, maybe a few years ago, we were seeing like sort of uniquely human leadership step up. And that's something I've always been really passionate about and have done a lot of like public speaking about. But I think in the last couple of years, since it's been a little bit more of a hirer's market, we've suddenly seen a little bit of a return to command and control and some other like not great practices. But I think in the age of AI, people are going to crave that human connection and in places that treat people well and and maybe it gives more time for those human connections. I think that's one of the things in my job I always wish I had more time for. And I think one of the reasons why we have such good retention rates at Adobe is like I will personally spend the time. Even I have 850 people on my team, but if I know someone's going to leave, I will talk to every single person individually who's like thinking about leaving my organization. And I still try to do exit interviews personally with every single person. And like I talk to a lot of people who are going to join the organization because I think it matters. Because I know that like if somebody's interviewing at Adobe and they're interviewing at some other company, that other SVP is not talking to that person that I am. And like often that makes a difference. And like I would love to do more of that. I can't always do it. But if that's going to cause some amazing designer or director or whoever to join my team, like what a great use of my time. But I'm one person.
Yeah. Well, I think, maybe to wrap it up a little bit here, I think is, some of the themes I'm hearing from you is, as we develop AI products, how do we empower control and agency, in the people that we're creating for? As leaders, how do we tap into the empathy and the connection to ensure that humanity is not lost? And also the future of talent looks like there's a extreme spectrum of generalization versus specialization. And these are all kind of like, I think, your hypothesis of how this future of design and AI and business might evolve. Any kind of final things we didn't cover today that you think is relevant?
Yeah, I mean, I think combining a few of those last thoughts, I think there is a lot of anxiety right now amongst our teams. And as leaders, I think diving in and understanding that and keeping our ear to the ground. And, one of the things that I do that I've done for a long time, which I think is like the best hour a month I spend, is I have what I call my IC staff, which is I've got a staff meeting once a month, which is with IC designers on my team that are under the principal level. So I've got like 15 individual contributors I meet with once a month. And it's their time to ask me literally anything that they want to. And it's a fascinating conversation that could not be more different than the leadership conversations I have. And it helps me really keep grounded and tapped into like what they're feeling, and people are scared.
Hmm.
And, whenever I go and do public speaking, there'll be a line of 40 people to talk to me about the future of creative careers, mostly because of my role at Adobe and in the industry. And there's just a lot of anxiety out there. And hopefully, and I would imagine everybody who's in this cohort is the kind of leader where their teams feel comfortable talking to them about that. But like really digging in and understanding that and helping like calm those nerves and having a plan. Like if you're not thinking about the things I was talking about with generalization and specialization and new tools and other things, and none of us have answers. I'm hypothesizing here based on like what I'm seeing, but like we need to have a plan for our people, and this isn't a future thing. This is a today thing. And if we're not like almost even like over communicating some of this stuff and hitting that like pressure release valve, like people are really worried. And so I think it's a bigger concern than I think some leaders are seeing um, because of a number of different reasons. And so I would just check on your people. That's maybe what I would leave everybody with.
Yeah. Is there any kind of final area of research that you think this council could go deeper in that you're finding maybe is a gap in this conversation or space?
Um, I think the thing that's happening right now that is the most interesting, but it's really emerging, which is why I don't think there's a lot of research around it, is this like how UX and coding tools are changing and morphing, and like what the future of like UX UI design looks like. I think it's going to look really different. And what the relationships specifically between designers and engineers looks like in the future. And I think the answer to that question now versus even a couple of months ago is really different. And so, I mean, the risk of that is doing research on that is going to become stale really fast. But I think it's so dynamic. I think we're kind of at the moment now where we were in the early days of, something like Mid-Journey, where we're like, oh, is this, I think this might actually be getting good. Like, it was like, you were starting to like squint at it and be like, oh, wait, what is this? And then all of a sudden there was something that like clicked off and it like so I think we're at the bottom of like this exponential curve with that. And that's going to be the time where our teams are like really impacted. And I think we're at the moment right before that happens. And I think that's what's going to hit this group hard. And so we're like, the pendulum's coming at us. So what do we do? It's not quite here yet, but it's close.
Yeah, we're feeling it. We're feeling the tension. Eric, this is such a, I think, wonderful place to stop this conversation. And, I think all of us is a rallying call to really figure out what is that action, next best action as this pendulum comes at us. So thank you so much for your time today.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for the chat, Gordon.